You'll get in your car without thinking about it. You'll glance at your phone. A payment will leave your account gone before you even notice. That's what a car costs you today. But the real answer is far stranger. The true price of a car was never about money. It was about what you were willing to risk, to build, to endure, just to move faster than your own 2 feet. Somewhere between then and now, that cost changed shape entirely. It didn't disappear. It just went into hiding. Go back to 1886. A German engineer named Karl Benz unveils something the world has never seen. A 3-wheeled, gasoline-powered vehicle he calls the Patent-Motorwagen. It runs on a single-cylinder engine, meaning one small metal chamber does all the work, pumping open and shut a few hundred times a minute to turn fuel into motion. It produces less power than a modern lawnmower. And it costs what a house costs. Who could afford that? Almost no one. The motor wagon wasn't transportation. It was a curiosity, a rich man's toy, parked more than driven. Neighbors thought it was dangerous. Some towns banned it outright. Benz himself struggled to sell a single unit in the machine's first 2 years on the market. Then his wife did something that changed everything. In August of 1888, Bertha Benz took 2 of her teenage sons, climbed into the motor wagon without her husband's knowledge, and drove it roughly 66 miles from Mannheim to Pforzheim. No highways existed yet. No gas stations existed yet. When the fuel ran low, she stopped at a pharmacy in a town called Wieslach and bought a cleaning solvent called Ligroin, because that's what the engine could burn. That pharmacy is still celebrated today as the birthplace of the world's very first fuel stop. That wasn't the only improvisation. A fuel line clogged, so she cleared it using a hatpin pulled from her own hair. A wire came loose, so she wrapped it in a garter for insulation. The wooden brake blocks wore thin on a hill, so she found a shoemaker in a nearby village and had him nail leather onto them. And in doing so, more or less invented the brake pad. Decades before anyone thought to patent one. She didn't do it for adventure. She did it to prove the machine worked. And it did. Word of her journey spread, and within a few years, real orders for the motor wagon started arriving. The true price of that first successful car wasn't paid in marks or coins. It was paid in hairpins, garters, and one woman's nerve. On roads that weren't built for wheels at all. Even the wheels themselves carried a hidden price. Those first cars rolled on solid rubber, no air inside at all, which meant every rock, rut, and pothole traveled straight up through the frame and into your spine. In 1895, 2 French brothers, André and Édouard Michelin, entered a car fitted with air-filled pneumatic tires into the Paris-Bordeaux race. Over 700 miles of rough, unpaved country roads. The tires kept puncturing. The brothers stopped again and again to patch them by hand, and they finished the race dead last. But the ride, everyone agreed, was smoother than anything they'd felt before. Within a decade, pneumatic tires became the standard. Not because they were reliable yet, but because comfort turned out to be worth paying for. Even in punctures and lost time, for the next 2 decades, that pattern barely changed. Owning a car meant owning a second unpaid job. You were your own mechanic, your own tow truck, your own emergency room more often than you'd like. Because early roads were unpaved dirt, engines overheated constantly, and tires blew every few dozen miles. A trip of 30 miles could eat an entire afternoon, not from traffic, but from stopping to refill a radiator with water scooped from a roadside creek, or from lying flat in the mud to reach a bolt that had shaken loose from the constant jolting. Owners kept full toolkits under their seats, not as a precaution, but as a certainty you would need them. It wasn't a question of if the car would fail you somewhere between towns. It was only a question of when and how far you'd have to walk afterward. But the steepest hidden cost wasn't the road. It was starting the engine at all. Before the 1910s, every car started the same brutal way. You gripped a hand crank at the front of the vehicle and turned it hard, forcing the engine to fire. If the timing was even slightly off, the engine could kick backward without warning, snapping the crank in the opposite direction with enough force to break a wrist, an arm, sometimes a jaw. It wasn't rare. It was routine. In 1908, a man named Byron Carter, a friend of Cadillac's founder, stopped to help a stranded motorist whose car had stalled. He cranked the engine. It kicked back. The injury seemed minor at first, but complications set in, and Carter eventually died from it. Cadillac's own engineering chief, a man named Charles Kettering, was reportedly so affected by the story that he spent the next few years designing an alternative. In 1911, Kettering introduced the electric self-starter, small motor that could fire the engine at the push of a button. No crank required. It worked. It also cost extra. For years, the electric starter was sold as a premium option, meaning safety itself had a price tag, and only certain buyers could afford to skip the risk entirely. Cars had already been expensive. Now the safer version of a car was even more expensive still. Then, in 1908, the same year Byron Carter was hurt, an American manufacturer had already begun changing the entire equation from a different direction. Henry Ford released the Model T at $825. Expensive, but suddenly within reach of a growing middle class, not just the wealthy. 5 years later, Ford's factories adopted the moving assembly line, where the car itself moved past workers instead of workers moving around a stationary car. The price kept falling. By the mid-1920s, a Model T cost around $260. The car had gone from a rich man's curiosity to something a factory worker could plausibly save toward. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. In January of 1914, Ford doubled his own workers' wages to $5 a day. History remembers this as generosity. The real reason was colder than that. Turnover on the assembly line was brutal. Workers were quitting in droves, unable to tolerate the exhausting, repetitive pace the new system demanded. The wage hike wasn't purely a gift. It was a fix for a machine that was wearing people down in order to make cars cheaper for everyone else, so the price on the sticker went down. But somewhere behind that number, a different kind of cost went up. That new cost had a name. In 1919, General Motors created something called the General Motors Acceptance Corporation, GMAC for short, one of the first companies built specifically to let ordinary people buy cars on credit. Before this, borrowing money for something as frivolous as a car was seen as reckless, even shameful. Banks wanted nothing to do with it. GMAC changed that, quietly and permanently. For the first time, you could drive home in a car you hadn't actually finished paying for. Did that sound familiar? It should. That's the exact moment the true cost of a car stopped being a single number and became something you'd carry with you every single month for years. Not one transaction, a relationship, a recurring invisible weight attached to your bank account. Okay. Decade after decade, buyer after buyer. Here's the counterintuitive part. The safer, cheaper, and more convenient cars became, the less visible their true costs became too. Early owners paid with blisters, burns, breakdowns, and the occasional broken wrist from a stubborn crank. You don't pay that price anymore. Instead, you pay in months, in interest rates, in a number quietly deducted before you've even finished your coffee. Neither cost ever really vanished. It only changed currency. Think about what a car actually asks of you today. Insurance, every single month, whether you crash or not. Fuel, or electricity, priced by forces on the other side of the planet you'll never see. Depreciation, draining value out of the vehicle the moment you drive it off the lot. Silent and relentless. And the payment itself, an obligation stretching years into your future. Attached to an object that's already losing worth while you're still paying it off. Gamaks. Original loans were meant to be paid off in about a year. Today, financing a car can stretch across half a decade or more. Quietly, comfortably. So the monthly number looks small, even while the total cost climbs higher the longer you stay attached to it. Stretch a debt out far enough, and it stops feeling like debt at all. It just feels like a bill. That's not an accident of arithmetic. It's the same trick GMAC discovered in 1919. Refined for 100 more years, the hidden costs even followed the car past the point of sale. In 2022, one major automaker briefly offered heated seats as a monthly subscription. A feature already physically installed in the car, simply switched off unless you kept paying. The hardware was yours. The warmth wasn't, not unless the payments continued. It's the same century-old pattern in a new shape. Own the machine outright and still owe something forever. Just to use all of it, Bertha Benz paid with a hatpin and a shoemaker's needle. You pay with a slice of your future income signed away in advance for the privilege of moving faster than your own feet. Here's the modern mirror. Every time you check that account balance, that auto-pay notification, that quiet number sliding out of your paycheck before you've even noticed, you're paying some version of the same debt every driver has paid since 1886. It just doesn't look like debt anymore. It looks like normal life. Somewhere in a garage in Mannheim, a machine once sat unsellable, because almost nobody could afford the price printed on its label.